All right. So here we go. So, just as a reflection from, just as I was putting the thumbnail up and looking at the other like videos, I was noting that I think that I think that the reading last night's kind of like impromptu reading with Luke as a special guest was like kind of unhinged. And I guess my takeaway from that is, first of all, like, okay. And second of all, that I think there's it's like starting to get, really getting, I guess the thing is get an understanding of what it's like to take this on even as a practice. And even that in that one reading that it was like there just wasn't anything really like left in terms of like, yeah, there wasn't any like sort of like gas in the tank kind of thing. And I don't know about you if you're following along on these, if you've read this hub, and I've mentioned before, there are like many folks have spoken about this hub being, particularly evocative and in a particular way. And I am experiencing that. And one of the other insights I'm getting here is the need to have space to process this, the need to have space for this. And so, it's kind of like some of this sort of residue kind of comes up in dreams sort of, and that's been a consistent part of this type of process for me. Certainly the parinama process is that the dreams do a lot of resurfacing and sort of processing out, but also just respect and appreciation for what I'll call like your process in this of realizing that it's like there really is something. I'm going to turn this light up a little bit. There really is something to be said for taking the time, taking the time that you need in this. And when you can feel it's too much, slowing it down. Yeah. Yeah, I think something that is just, I mean, this is like there's so much about this that has no kind of clear parallel, probably for a good reason. It's such a non-consumer style product. But one of them is that it really is like it really works against a notion of like starting and completing something. And that even in and itself, like how to practice this is the practice, which is that it's like we're not trying to like arrive anywhere. That what we're just trying to do is like release the tangle even just a little bit. And there's nowhere to be, there's nowhere to go with it. It's not like we're trying to like it's like have the, no knot thread, like there's nowhere. It's just, it really is about the felt experience of being alive. And yeah, and releasing the binds in that hold us all back from being able to feel fully alive, to feel free, to feel feelings, to feel love, to like these things. Like this is what, it's like it's this is, yeah, I mean, it's not like self-help in that sense, and it's hard. It's hard. I wasn't gonna say anything about this, but there's like this whole thing right now going on. This like whole thing about dopamine, and there's the what's her name? Anne Lemke, who's Dopamine Nation, writing this Dopamine Nation book, and there you have these two Stanford researchers who are really launching this scientifically backed, air quotes, like there's no actual research, it's all case studies, by the way. It's presented by scientists, so they present their work in a way that it's all, it's all anecdotal, and it's all, and the notion, I'll cut to the chase here. The notion is that the problem that we're having is that we are too overstimulated with dopamine. Like there's just like too much pleasure. And that there's like some brain reflex that's like, it's a seesaw. It's like when you push on pleasure, the, it's some like that like this counter force exerts itself, that she calls like these gremlins inside of you. I mean, it's like the whole narrative is so destructive, like, because it's once again this thing about creating this like conflicted relationship within yourself. And she wrote a book called Dopamine Nation, and the whole thing is that, the reason everyone's so miserable is that we've like, it's like everyone has everything they need so easily, which is also like a completely like like the standpoint of someone who is living in a bubble, mainly Palo Alto, one of the richest places in the world. It's like everyone gets everything they want, at a click away, and it's like, yeah, not really. And then painting this as a cultural phenomenon, and that the problem is pleasure, dopamine. Problem is pleasure, and this is a really old tenet that's getting resurfaced, and it's really, as far as someone making a career for themselves out of it, you can see an individual ambition be like identifying this as an adaptation that's going to be very easily identified and activated. It's going to feel like truth to people because it has its roots in asceticism and like religious, like renunciation. It's like the low dopamine, like lowering your dopamine set point, and that, and even, yeah, like, what is it? Asceticism, Puritanism, which is like, the problem is that, if you remove yourself from pleasurable things, versus if you have a compulsive relationship with like with things, like specific actions that are, dopamine inducing, that, like, what we're trying to do is actually solve for something within ourselves, like a primary need, to feel safe and secure, to feel like nurtured and cherished. And this would also have to do with like intimacy and feeling and the deliciousness of that, to have attunement with people, to be seen and delighted in, and to have your development and your growth be something that's important. And it's interesting because I listened to a podcast with the author of this book. This is that interesting that this is coming up. It's really a podcast where she talks about her own realization about this like dopamine problem in addiction with people who have everything, air quotes, because she's, her as a, I think she was a therapist or like psychiatrist. I think she's a therapist of some sort. And her, her clients, because she's in Silicon Valley, are, like highly affluent and have everything, so that their problems, of course, how could this possibly make sense? That if someone has everything that they're told to want without actually having a relationship with like what they want, um it's like that, oh my God, can you believe it? These people who are rich aren't happy. It's like that old chestnut. And her thing was she was like, "Well, I had this eureka when I became addicted to teen vampire romance novels," and no shade to this, she goes on and says to that she was reading voraciously these books, and then she figured out that if you open them to 2/3 of the way through, you get right to the sex scene. And so she was like went through all of the genre. It's like some particular genre that's like related to the Twilight Saga, like that. It's like vampires and eroticism and stuff. And then she's like, you get right to the sex scene. And it's like, I mean, it's literally interesting that all this like very mechanical thing of this is about dopamine versus like I like her own desire, her own sexual desires never get explored. Her own desires for like intimacy and feeling and what was like the common denominator in all of those books, which is why they're so popular because they're actually pushing the button and massaging the, like the need to be cherished with intimacy, to be like adored and touched and wanted like that. Instead of examining that, it's like, well, I was reading them all the time and I realized that, I was hiding them from my family and had a voracious appetite for them. But the issue with dopamine, the issue is that I was like getting overstimulated and increasing my set point for that. Not that I was seeking a pacifier to solve for a primary, like a very, anyway. So yeah. That's it. So, yeah, it's interesting because I was like the whole like I was just getting this like ick. It's on a podcast I love, Hidden Brain, or I don't know if I like it a lot. There's like a lot of good episodes. Um, and the whole time I was like just getting this like revolting ick about it. Just like, oh my God, this is just like absolutely. And then to find out, actually, I found out I saw on a TikTok that she's like her and there's another researcher and her, like the two of them are kind of a two-headed monster. Like go on like evangelical podcasts and they talk about like how, of course this is tied to morality. It's like, oh shit. Yeah, let's just really not get into this thing. Even the thing like using a word like dopamine is like, oh, so I'm going to take one more round on this. Even using scientific sounding words, and people will do this. They'll be like, I'm doing a dopamine. And it's like the word, being able to use a word that's associated with science, like gives people a sense that what somebody's saying is informed because they're using like a science word when really, it's based, the knowledge and the understanding of like dopamine is like just to like a one sentence definition, which is like the feel good, like the feel good neuro, like brain chemical, it really truly. So yeah, beware anyone that's telling you like pleasure is the problem and that even this stuff that's like, this whole thing that systems are, anything that places individual blame with morality and judgment and increases the fissure in the relationship with oneself is like highly dangerous. It's just so it serves. Yeah, it serves a master. We wanna be feeling. We wanna be feeling. We want to have a good relationship with ourselves. We don't want to be subscribing to this notion that there is something inside of us, this original sin, this part of us that needs to be killed, so that we just constantly in our lives have this conflict that is like, there's just something bad about me. And it's not true. It's not true. It is why these concepts cause just so much conflict, because if it was true, we would integrate it and it would be end of story. It just nothing. It'd just be like absorbed like water in a, earth or whatever. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. Okay. So here we go. So this section is devotion and love is a verb. So I'm going to read this for you and then I'm going to go have some breakfast. Okay. So I'll get to reading here. I'm trying to figure out placement here, but I think I'll do for right now. I look really tired right now. So I discuss the discipline of devotion in the third hub. It's in the last chapter, chapter 6. But here we appreciate that love is a verb and how consistently showing up is how we express it. And that perfectionism is, wow, another typo. What's happening? That's what happens. It's a big book. Typos can hide in here. Okay, that perfectionism is the enemy. Aspiring to be our best is different from requiring perfection. Aspiring to be our best is different from requiring perfection. By reducing or eliminating the pressure and shame of perfectionism, we show up as we are and give the best of what we have to offer. Each day of showing up builds momentum and equity. And the more equity we have, the greater the momentum and trust we earn with ourselves and others. So, as I discuss above, showing up on the shitty days is especially important. Every day we wake up and decide what we commit to, every day we wake up and decide what we commit to. And because of this, love is new every day. We experience joy and sadness, pleasure and pain, good times and bad, but through them all, showing up demonstrates love as it increases our capacity. The process of growing capacity for devotion doesn't necessarily require other people. Time spent with nature, plants, and animals provides a way back to the devotion and surrender found through connection. Connection will find us even if we try to avoid it. We find love with animals, nature, plants, and in art. And the deepening of self-awareness and acceptance is love in action. And, and to elaborate on that, showing up for ourselves. Love, like we've really, one of the things, another like externalized function is that love is really, this idea that, it's like love is expressed through like, through with other people, which of course it is. Of course it is. But, I was talking about this, I think yesterday in one of the readings, which is this process and this loving process is, there's so much about like how to be happy, like be happy, get happy. Here's hacks to be happy, your gratitude practice, your, go skipping down the road, take a walk outside. Like, it's great. That's great. Why not cultivate that? That's fantastic. However, what to cultivate, and this has to do with the devotion. So anyone who has done something like, and parenting and, things that have to do with other people, showing up for other people, caring for a aging parent, Yeah. I mean, there's anything, the fact that, if you feed your dog every day, you care for them and you pay, attention. Some days not so much, some days full on, and it's like the homeostasis of love is that it's showing up with the best of what's available for that day. But this is the thing when this practice is what we are like cultivating is how to show up for ourselves and not try to shut ourselves up when we're not pleasant. Change that to be able to be present with ourselves, perfectionism, like the idea that it's like my best self is the self that is like looks super like bright and shiny, is smiling, is buoyant, is happy, is like delightful and in a good mood, and that's the person I like. The person I don't like is the person who is grouchy, a person who's somber, who's tired, who's aggravated, it's like that's the and it's like, no, they're both you. And so to love yourself, the idea is like appreciating the high notes is like, sure, sure, maybe, but the thing is if I think that, one nanoparticle of being able to appreciate yourself in like in the low energy, less favorable, like favorable like states is like kind of worth a bushel of increasing appreciation for the delightful cocktail party side of ourselves. I like when so my first job, professional job out of college was I worked for Eli Lilly, a pharmaceutical company. And this is wild. But I worked for Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly made Prozac, fluoxetine, the first like, SSRI. And I worked for so this is a little TMI, but so I worked for them when they lost the patent for Prozac and it went generic. And so there was just a lot of like kind of hand wringing about how to, it's like, okay, well, like what do we do now? And oh yeah, and I'd actually joined the company. I'd accepted the position to sell their diabetes drugs. That's what I'd wanted to do. And I'd had a bunch of offers and I'd wanted I like the diabetes felt like the most like in integrity because they developed an analog insulin which is like a first in its class. So like this 25 plus years ago where so this is like way too far afield here, but here we go. So the rapid acting insulin, they used to just basically take animal insulin or even, engineered human insulin and, you'd inject it, but when it was in solution, it would form like tetramers, like it would actually solidify in a sense, like it would, because when it's coming out of a pancreas, it's like but in solution, it was connecting. So what would happen is if you'd inject it, you'd need to spend like 20 minutes with it sort of dissolving itself into your bloodstream so it could be biologically available. So for people with diabetes, it's really difficult. And, for like eating out at a restaurant, they could, for type 1, they could go hypo. Especially, yeah. So anyway, or yeah, it was just hard to time. And then they developed analog, which flipped the amino acids in the insulin so that in solution, it just never bound. And so that was immediately available. So you could create like insulin pumps so people could have these lives that were really similar to what they were before their diagnosis. Anyway, so I love that. But then I was taken out of that division and moved to sell Zyprexa, which I think is like olanzapine, is the name. And this is like a long ass story to make one point, which is nuts for me to do here. But this is how we do here. And I remember, so Lindsay, so we, Zyprexa was its primary indication was like for bipolar, and I forget like which facet of bipolar at the time. I imagine now it's like more of a full spectrum thing. A lot to say on that experience. Oh boy. Yeah. But part of our training was learning about bipolar. And I remember, and you got extraordinary amounts of training. Like, not extraordinary, but like a lot. Trained, you get trained to be like a, propaganda, you know, so that's extraordinary, I guess. Not extraordinary in its like capacity to dispel like the context and reality of what you're representing. This is like definitely okay. This is a little unhinged. Okay, I'm gonna get to the point here. And in one of the trainings, there, a clinician was talking about how one of the most like the things about someone with bipolar is that when they're high, they're like when they're manic and they're highly productive, really charismatic, just, super energetic, they identify with that being themselves, and that the depressive episodes are like the part of them that they're like, yeah, this is when I'm not being myself. So that the part of the like part of this kind of thing with like a certain level of bipolar, and maybe all of it, is that it's like this identity with being up, and the down is like, that's not me, that's the part I'm trying to solve for. I don't, the mania is when I'm brilliant. And it was like, and I just remember thinking, that's everybody. That's everybody. It's like what it was really chaotic to me that it was like that there wasn't any self-identification, which is like everyone feels that way. And so to go full circle here, yeah, right? That it's everybody, and what we really want to do is identify and be able to show up for all the parts of ourselves, like all the aspects. Like the low part is to develop an ability to be with ourselves and stop trying to like shut it up. It's like allow it to reveal itself. It's uncomfortable, doesn't feel great. I mean, it gets easier. And sometimes it's like in the beginning, it's so hard. Like we don't the capacity to kind of like be with oneself when it's like kind of an aspect of ourselves that we don't really want to know. Um, and to be with that and to allow it to be, and then to ask it questions, to be curious, and then get into a process of like comforting, soothing, passing it through, whatever. But instead of just being, instead of this relationship that we have with ourselves, which is just like, like shut the F up. It's like, oh, that part is there too. And this is part of devotion. This is part of loving ourselves, is showing up for ourselves within the vicissitudes of who we are. Because it's all lovable. It's all lovable. The more we are able to be compassionate and loving to ourselves, the better that we are for others, because we're able to remain, relatively self-aware and present and accountable for our behavior. So we're not trying to like disguise something or pass it through or frustrated with ourselves, that it's like, yeah, this is where this is at right now. Other people might not like it. It's fine. With their projections. But it's listen, if it's happening, it's happening, and so it's kind of like, what's the approach here? It's going to be the most loving. Okay. That's it. Oh my God. Here, one bang of the gong for that one. Okay, I'm gonna go get some breakfast. Thank you for watching. Appreciate you, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.